surround yourself with people who are going to challenge what you're saying in a positive way, but also that you can learn from. Because before I even moved to Austin, I didn't have a wide network of people that I could leverage from a connections, from a network, from just an intelligence standpoint. Nor did I have people who would challenge my ideals, and not in a bad way, just like, hey, why do you think this? Or why do you think this product is important? And I think the last couple of years, specifically, especially over COVID, I've tried really hard to bring in just a vast amount of people that I trust and or that have backgrounds that I can learn from and just continually educate myself, but also can give me feedback.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And if you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com. We're always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Justin Ullestad, if I say the last name right. And as a quick introduction to Justin, so went to high school and in his words was kind of a wannabe athlete, got hurt, turned to music, went to college, was a music major, and I think did a major in music and in business, and he can correct me where that is, and was always interested both kind of on the creative side as well as the logic side of the brain. After undergraduate, went and worked in LA for a distribution company for a while, learned how not to run a business, went back after a year or so and got an MBA, and then went into consulting for a while, worked on a couple startups for others, also started a business focusing on student athletes, and then had to pivot that a bit as COVID hit. And then he'll tell us a little bit about now how that brings him to where he's at today. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Justin.
Appreciate you having me, Devin. That was a great intro.
Awesome. Well, I gave kind of the 30-second quick run through of a much longer journey, but now take us back in time a bit, back to kind of high school and getting into athletes and athletics and then how your journey went from there.
Absolutely. So as Devin said or as you said, the stem of my journey sort of started when I was one of those, short kids that wanted to be a professional athlete, right? I was 5'2" till I was a junior. So I didn't really get the run up that I dreamed of as an athlete. And I was in basketball, baseball, football, the major sports. Got hurt my freshman year and never really continued on in that journey because I didn't fit, and I was always worried about getting hurt again. So turned to music, as that was the other thing that I was really passionate about, and sort of delved headfirst into that. Went to Allstate, went to solo ensemble contests, and like really worked my way through that, getting further into that space, and then went to University of Iowa and was a music major there. And then with my background as well, knowing that like I probably wasn't going to be a professional musician, like that wasn't my end goal. Also got a business degree while I was at University of Iowa. So the two opposite ends of the spectrum as far as a major you could choose, I did. So I was there for 4.5 years, and so finished out school at University of Iowa. I loved Iowa. It was a great time. Sometimes wish I could go back. And then, as you said, I went to Los Angeles for a year. Tried it was 2011, so when you get a job out of college, you took it at that point. And so went out to LA, tried it for a year, lost money, not for the company wasn't the right fit, but I learned a lot about
hold on just 1 second on that.
Yeah.
So how did you get a job that you lose money at? Was it one where you invested in or they didn't pay enough or cost of living? Usually at least a job will pay you. So that was where I wanted to double check on.
Yeah, I made $30,000 in LA my first year. And as anybody who lives in Los Angeles or who lives on the West Coast would know, for California, like that's not necessarily a livable wage. And I struggle with that a little bit as far as like, okay, I'm working here. It wasn't a lot of career growth. I had a savings going out there and that dwindled away. You're paying, almost $2,000 in rent just by yourself. So, that was the whole thing. So, but I enjoyed my time in LA as far as like a social standpoint. If I could make, gobs of money, like I think I would enjoy, having some time in LA, but, from a your first job standpoint. I mean, everybody talks about this dream moving out to Los Angeles and like starting their career, and it is a grind. And I appreciate those people that like are willing to put in the time and effort to do that grind in Los Angeles.
So no, definitely makes sense. And so that's what I was gonna say. So it wasn't that you lost money in the sense they didn't pay you that. It was just that the
Correct.
amount that they were paying you was such that you weren't able to support yourself or make a living off of it, such that in essence you lost money. So yeah, I
Yes.
did that for a year. And I think you also mentioned a bit when we chatted before the podcast. So you also kind of learned a bit of what not to do or how not to run a business or those type of things. Maybe provide a bit of an insight as to kind of how that went.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I learned off the hand is like you're obviously in a business like your customer is the statement your customer's always right. But for me, it's always treat your customers right. And so there were certain times where I had built relationships with distributors or customers, and it would be more profitable for the company to do it this way. But in my mind and my Midwest morals, like it was better for a customer relationship and just from a standard to do it this way. And because the company chose to do it the company beneficial way, like we lost customers and we lost deals because of that. And so, learning of, hey, from a accounting or like an FP&A standpoint, like, hey, let's do business this way, or let's set it up this way, as opposed to the way that, that company had. And so there was a lot of, I mean, it's international company. So there was a lot of things that didn't necessarily translate to the United States as far as culture, as far as regulations, as far as additional like just business acumen. But I learned a lot, and it was a great experience to me of like, hey, if as someone who wanted to be an entrepreneur, here's how I wouldn't run a business, or here's things that I would put in place to fill these holes that I'm seeing in this business right now, which was, making, net revenue, $1 million, 2 million a year with their US business.
No, definitely makes sense. So, and it's always interesting. One of the, how much customer service and how much, how you interact and treat customers and all that can impact a business. It's one where it has a big impact on it, but oftentimes you don't necessarily think about it. Or it's one where, hey, you're more focused on doing the work or
Right.
figuring it out or making cost or whatever. And yet the biggest thing people often forget about is taking care of the customer. So that sounds like it was a great lesson to learn early on in the career. So now as you
100%.
kind of go through that, and do that, then you said, I think you went back and got an MBA after working for about a year or so with the other company so that you'd have a better kind of business background or acumen as far as as far as if you're to be a participate or run a business or otherwise do
Yep.
that. Is that about right?
Correct. My business degree in undergrad was in entrepreneurship, right? So it was a lot of case study and market research and those kind of things. And so I had missed at least in my boy, the operational and like the actual function of the company, or building a company from an operational standpoint. And so wanted to go back to grad school, one, because I wanted to leave California, and I was and this role. So like one option for me was like, okay, I had an in a grad school that I had a living situation set up. Like this makes more sense than not to. And so went to grad school sort of to learn about operational efficiencies and setting up a team and how to really launch a business as opposed to launch a product. And so spent 2.5 years in South Florida at Florida Atlantic University. I did specialize in entrepreneurship, but more from an operational stand-up situational, and learned a lot from them. Worked along with the athletics department as well as the Bachelor of Arts school, and worked as a TA, which was beneficial because I got to work with students. I got to help them through their undergraduate journey, which sort of ties into the student athlete company later on. And also just got, the training I needed to, see the world a little bit differently through more of a operational lens as opposed to a here's a product lens.
No, definitely makes sense. So now you go back, you get the MBA, kind of get that additional training and education and whatnot. And as you're coming out, kind of now you're looking as to what you want to do or what kind of employment in that, and kind of where did you transition or land to from there?
Well, after grad school, that I had no short of jobs that I applied to. It just a repercussion of the timing in which I went and got my grad school. At least in my opinion, I had too much education, not enough experience to like fit in the roles that I was looking to dive into. And so I ended up just consulting for a myriad of companies on the side as an independent contractor. Just like I couldn't find the right fit of like, hey, I want this level job, or I think I'm valued here, but I didn't want to take an entry level, or even some entry levels wouldn't take me because of my education. So I had a couple opportunities that I said no to just based on situationals. One was a job in New York City that, was going to be a very similar situation to my LA situation, where it was like right above the cost of living, right? And there's some people that are willing to take that risk, and I, based on where I was situationally, I didn't want to take that on, and the company wasn't the exact fit I was looking for. So did consulting for about a year and a half, and did product launches, worked with nonprofits, worked with franchisee owners, did a myriad of things, website development, social, digital advertising, pitch decks, a wide range of things that have helped me now, later on. That it really was an invaluable year and a half. But at some point in time, health insurance is important. So definitely wanted to spend the time learning, but also finding the next step in my career, which led me to Austin.
No, and so now you get to Austin, and definitely makes sense how you're kind of navigating. And I think along the way, as you graduated, got the MBA, you went and worked for a couple different startups prior to kind of starting your own thing. Is that about right?
Correct.
So what was the experience with those startups as opposed to when you worked at LA and did that business? Did you love working for other startups? Was it a good experience? Did you further gain education as to what not to do, and kind of what were those startups?
So the first startup I worked for was a sports media company here in Austin, like full-time work for, as far as a W-2 employee. And I started in there in one role in a sales operation standpoint, as far as like a pre-sale and like building out pitch decks and building out strategy of how we're going to gain revenue through advertising, and was able to work my way through the company into new roles, new visibility, higher up as far as responsibility and insight into the business. Excuse me. And by the time I left, my partner at the office and myself had built out a huge value prop, for the company, as far as how they did business and what they used to measure business success, right? So I was able to see, from a role that is mid to senior associate, all the way to like a senior manager, as far as understanding that growth perspective, but also understanding like, hey, once you get to a certain spot, within a startup world, you hit a ceiling, because there's only so far you can go internally until you have to make a big jump. And a lot of times in startups, like, that is people that have been there forever. That is people who are founders, who have a lot of investment in the company, and the company's invested a lot in them, as opposed to someone like myself, who was just grinding away, pounding on doors and working my way through. But it was a wonderful experience that I learned, hey, there are certain things across the business that you can build here, and then you can actually scale across. And hey, this affects not only your department or your function, but it affects the bottom line across all the FP&As across your business. And you can bring impact with just your one initiative, or your one rollout, or your one product release, and really bring value that is usurped across the company. So that was a great experience. I'm still very close with a lot of people I work there. Like, we were in the trenches. That's the thing about startups, right? Like, you're in the trenches, you're pushing forward. It's a grind, but like the wins are your wins. The wins are a team win. It's a much more gratifying feeling than when I was working in LA. It was like, you get a win, it's more of a corporate win, and nobody really has like, there's not that celebratory thing, or there's not like feeling like you accomplished anything. It was just like, hey, we rode the boat forward a little bit. We're still at sea.
No, definitely makes sense. And it's one word, that ceiling, you hit it in different forms. Unless you're doing your own business, your own startup, you're always going to hit that ceiling at some point or another, in the sense that it's going to be one where there's only so many, or only so far up you can go, or only so much room, and then then there isn't any more further room to grow. Right. So kind of as you started to work for those other startups, get that experience, and then or realize that you had kind of those glass ceilings, how did that transition to the doing your own business?
So the big thing for me is, it always been, is like self growth and personal motivation, and like actually getting better every day. Like, I have that on a poster on my wall. It's like, hustle, stay humble, hustle hard, right? And like making sure that you're still growing every day. And once I like at the first startup here in Austin, I hit that ceiling, it just became more of monotony. And as far as, hey, I'm doing the same task every day. We're out of build mode now. We're in maintenance mode, and we never really got a chance to go back in build mode. And we were in that sort of like hold the course for about a year. And so, after that amount of time, you're just like, well, if I've been here for a year, like what's stopping the next year from being the same, right? And so, I moved on to a different startup in a different kind of capacity from an M&A, M&A position, and then the market changed, so like that got moved around. So there's been a lot of things that I as an entrepreneurial mindset in person, I like to have control of my situation, whether that's career wise or personal wise, and I also like to be in charge of my own destiny. And so certain things over the past 2 years have pushed me towards, hey, I have these ideas, I have these goals. The founding teams that I'm on, like we all believe in what we're doing, and there's no time now, like the president, specifically with like the market change over the past year with COVID-19 and sort of the resurgence of consumer buying habits here in the last 6 months. There's no better time than the president to like actually give it a shot and try and really take control, take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and really give it a shot, as opposed to keeping the safe route, I'm going to say, but also understanding like your mental happiness and sanity is super important, specifically in a very remote based working world right now. And I think that's one thing that is definitely in the last 6 months rung true for me, as well as my partners, as far as, hey, it's important for us to achieve our goals, or at least try to achieve our goals, as opposed to just sitting on them and wishing for them to happen. And I think, for the remote working environment that we're in, that has definitely heightened that effort to push forward.
No, and that definitely makes sense. Now, circling back just a little bit to when kind of transition or looking to, hey, I want to take control. I want to, take the bulls by the horns, do my own thing, capture my own destiny, kind of whatever cliche you want. But, you're saying, okay, I want to do my own thing. Now, as you go out and do that, how did you figure out what that was? Or did you start doing it? Did you quit your job and just say, hey, I'm going to go full blast at it? Did you start something out as a side hustle? Did you get other partners? Or how did you kind of make the transition? And how did you figure out what you wanted to do?
100%. So on that note, two co-founders and myself started Athletes to Athletes 2 years ago. 2 years ago, actually, this month, and it was an idea to help high school student athletes have a better recruiting experience, and inevitably have a better college experience, which enables them to have a better holistic life experience post-college. Because a lot of the student athletes today, like, they are inundated by recruiting information just out the wazoo, as well as fictitious information presented by recruiters who are paid to entice you to come to schools. And so, providing a service that's performed and your interactions with former student athletes and former college athletes, like that's really the value prop that we push forward. And all our advisors are former college athletes. And so we started that in 2019 because we saw the writing on the wall of like the recruiting landscape is changing. We want to be part of the next wave of empowering high schoolers, right? The player empowerment movement, as they're talking like in the professionals, like that is also a thing we're pushing forward in the high school space. And so we started this in 2019. We had big time goals for 2020, starting in January, February of last year, with the goal of some of the founders going full time on this, and then COVID happened and everything stopped. And so at that moment, we're all like, okay, we're gonna stand pat, keep our day jobs, because there's no sports happening for 6 months, 12 months. And so we push forward through that. And then just recently, I've made the decision to move on to this full time. So like jumping off that cliff. So taking the entrepreneurial step, and then another founder's coming on full time here in the next couple months, which is really exciting. And but I would say like the timing of it was both beneficial but also like tumultuous, as far as we wanted to push hard on this last year, and we really wanted to go for it, but understanding that timing is everything. And I think if we waited another year, I think we'd be too late. So I actually think the timing was perfect for us to really get our house in order, move to a digitally only product, which was a huge thing that we weren't doing. We were doing in-person advising, and spending the 6-9 months to really reevaluate relaunch, so to speak, and push forward with, the new vision of our company.
No, and that definitely makes sense. And one of the other things you hit on as we chatted a bit before was, you have the company, you launched it a couple of years ago, and you had to pivot a bit with COVID
Mhm.
as well, right? In the sense
Yeah.
that that landscape changed. So how did you guys pivot, and was that beneficial in the sense that sometimes a forced pivot is, hey, it's not what we want, it's not as
Right.
is lucrative or is worthwhile for the company, but we want to keep it alive and keep it moving forward. Versus others, sometimes when you're forced to pivot, even though you wouldn't have thought of it, it forces you to go in a new direction that can actually be beneficial or better than what you originally were doing. So kind of as you did that pivot, what did you do and how did it work out so
Yeah,
far?
I think it's a bit of both as far as like the pivot you have to, and then actually was beneficial. When COVID hit in March, we'll say last year, I can't believe it's been 13 months of this actually, but all youth sports stopped. High school, like tournaments canceled, nothing happened, and so the amount of money people, parents were spending on their kids, diminished entirely, right? So the the stoppage in events led to a stoppage in advising, which led to a stoppage really in our business, from a new client intake perspective. And so, as we were a one-on-one advising in-person company here based in Central Texas, and we served Dallas, Austin, and Houston areas broadly. We were doing our advice sessions in person. We were one-on-one conversations with kids, which we still think is super valuable, right?
Mm.
But because that one-on-one interaction is so tangible, and you can actually have face-to-face and read emotions, and understand what the vibe in a room is, as opposed to a digital meeting. But with the pivot we've made in the last year to a fully digital space, we now have the ability to advise and our market nationwide. So it completely opens up our pipeline for additional kids that we can help, but it does take away a little bit in that one-on-one advising experience from that in-person standpoint. And with a lot of companies entering the space that are very tech focused, and like heavy on like, we'll give you X and you go do it. We definitely want to be that personal touch company, as far as, hey, we build a program for you, for your student athlete, for your parents, and understanding that vibe. But again, like being in a digital first environment makes it just a little more tricky. So we spent, the extra time the last, 12 months figuring out how to move our one-on-one advising into a digital space that is still effective to a rate that we think is acceptable.
No, and that definitely, you know, pivoting one sense, you have to figure out a new way. Sometimes you figure out better ways and it helps do it, and on the other hand you're also saying, and I'd also like for life to go back as a bit as normal, because we liked our own
Yes.
model and it had a lot of good things to it as well. So it sounds like kind of on both fronts it is beneficial because it increased or expanded the model you guys are at,
Mhm.
and it also, as things hopefully open up, you can also incorporate that with what you're previously doing
Yep.
and have kind of both of those models. So definitely makes sense. So well, as we kind of now are brought towards the future, the current, or where your
Mhm.
journey is up till today, I always have two questions kind of at the end of the journey that I always like to ask. So we'll shift to those now. So the
Yep.
first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
The worst business decision I've ever made is I didn't do my homework. And when I say homework in this context, I mean I didn't go and ask customers what they wanted.
Mm.
I had an idea. I asked people that I trusted, as far as like friends and like people that would like the product, and just put it out there. And I think for like a proof of concept that works. But in my younger, more naive days, I was just like, oh, people around me like this. Why don't we just put it out to the market and it'll be great?
Mm.
And not understanding the landscape, not understanding, what the competitive depth was, and also not having something that was super differentiated from our competitors. That didn't help, right? So, and this is like 2014, so like the e-commerce space isn't what it is now, and those kind of ideas. But I'll parlay that into the same situation happened, where I had an idea and I wrote out a business plan and a case study and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't do my homework, and I should have done it, and it would have been in a much better place today if we had done it in 2016 or whatever year it was,
Mm.
because I actually had an idea that was ahead of the game and now is a very prominent ideal across the sports media industry. But because I didn't do my homework, I didn't do anything with it. And so, that on both fronts is something that I wish I had done better with, which I've definitely learned from now, as far as like with athletes to athletes specifically, like we talk to student athletes as much as we can. Even if they're not even involved with our program, we like, hey, here's what we do. What is the value? We talk to former college athletes and say, hey, would this program be valuable? And I can tell you 100% certainty, every student athlete we've talked to that has gone through the recruiting process and has gone through college athletics wishes they had something like we have now. And so it reiterates the importance of front loading this information and this service to high schoolers to help them better prepare for a college athlete experience, which is completely different than just a regular student college experience.
No, I think that definitely is one to, as far as doing your homework, is one where, I don't think anybody thinks that you shouldn't do your homework, but one is, oh, I know the market well enough, or, oh, I know this well enough, or, hey, this is definitely something I would use and other people would
Right.
obviously use it. And even if that's the case, now you have to figure out, okay, how big is the market? Is there 10 people that would use this, including myself, or is there 1 million people that use it? And how much would they pay it for versus how much they would cost? And, the thing is, everybody's like, well, you do a business plan and, you do that kind of thing. And it always inevitably changes and you pivot and you adjust, which is always true. But you also need to, at the onset, as you're figuring out what to do and how to approach and how to tackle it, you need to have, I think, that structure such that while you're inevitably going to pivot, you have enough reason, you convince yourself, so to speak, that there's a market here and there's a business opportunity. So I definitely think that makes sense, both on getting excited, and it's easy to make that, mistake, but also one where it's a good one to learn from.
Yeah. So, I did passable homework, not A+ homework. That's really what it was, right?
Yeah. So now we jump to the second question, which is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
The one piece of advice I would have, and that I've really tried to do the past 2-3 years, is surround yourself with people who are going to challenge what you're saying in a positive way, but also that you can learn from. Because before I even moved to Austin, I didn't have a wide network of people that I could leverage from a connections, from a network, from just an intelligence standpoint. Nor did I have people who would challenge my ideals, and not in a bad way, just like, hey, why do you think this? Or why do you think this product is important? And I think the last couple of years, specifically, especially over COVID, I've tried really hard to bring in just a vast amount of people that I trust and or that have backgrounds that I can learn from and just continually educate myself, but also can give me feedback. And one thing that I tell young entrepreneurs is, like, don't be afraid to share your idea. There's a very, very low risk that anyone's going to be like, that's a good idea, I'm going to go do it now. Like, that's not the entrepreneurial space, right? Other entrepreneurs are here to help you. And so, share your idea. Like, don't give them like the schematic, but like, here's what I'm trying to do. What do you think? Right? Or here's my concept of how this might work in this marketplace. You work in this marketplace. What do you think? Right? And get feedback on your idea, get feedback on your business model, get feedback as much as you can from people that you trust, and you will be much better suited for it. Because just an example, I can look at a Word document and read it 30 times and be like, cool, I'm ready to go. And then you get a new set of eyes and there's one thing you missed. And getting additional set of eyes on an idea or a concept, especially if you're gonna tie your horse to it, is super important, super valuable.
No, I definitely agree with that, and I think it makes perfect sense. Well, as we wrap up, if people are wanting to reach out to you, they're wanting to find out more about your business, and they have a student athlete, or they have a nephew or a niece, or they are the athlete, or any of the above. If they're an athlete, they want to be a client, a customer, they want to be an investor, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out, contact you, or find out more?
100%. So the business website is athletes2athletes.com. It's athletes.com. My Instagram handle is Ullestad, Jullestad, or you can email me directly at justin@athletes2athletes.com. We are currently excited about our growth, excited about the future for what we're doing. we have in plans for investment and additional staffing and additional resources, in the next couple years throughout the next, 18 to 24 months. And we're super excited to help, additional student athletes, whether they be, freshman, sophomore, junior, even middle school at this point, help them through their recruiting journey and get them to a school that makes sense for them and their needs.
No, I think that's a great way to reach out, great way to find out more, and definitely appreciate you putting it out there. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to go to inventiveguests.com, apply to be on the show. 2 more things as a listener. 1, make sure to click subscribe in your podcast player so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. 2, leave us a review so new people can find out about our awesome episodes as well. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time with us to chat. Thank you again, Justin, for coming on. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Appreciate it, Devin. Thank you so much.